Hi guys, it's Miss Ruiz. Today we're going to be taking notes on dividing rational numbers. So please make sure to title your paper Dividing Rational Numbers and put today's date on it, and let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to begin this video with a little discussion here. Looking at these three fractions, a question I often get from students is what's the difference when there's the negative sign with the denominator, the numerator, or in the center. So let's take a look at these three fractions to see if they are equivalent. Okay. So on the first example, the first problem, I have positive 12 divided by a negative 4. Well, if I do the math there, I'm looking and I know that one of the numbers is positive, the other one is negative, so my answer is going to be a negative. And then I divide 12 divided by 4, that's going to be a negative 3. Okay. On the next one, I also have a similar scenario where one of the numbers is positive, the other one is negative, so my answer is going to be negative. 12 divided by 4 is also 3. And then on the last example, I've got the division in parentheses with the negative on the outside, which means I would do the division. 12 divided by 4 is going to equal 3. And then I'm multiplying that times a negative, and so it's also going to be negative 3. So the point of this exercise is to show you that when we're looking at a fraction, it doesn't matter if the negative sign is on the denominator, in the numerator, or on the side. This fraction, all of these fractions are a negative fraction. Okay? So what I want you to keep in mind is that as long as one of the numbers is negative, the other one is positive, the answer in that fraction in and of itself is a negative fraction. If both of the numbers are negative, the answer is going to be a positive, and you can rewrite that fraction as a positive fraction. Okay. We're going to use this a lot as we continue working with fractions in the classroom and in these notes today. So just try to keep that in mind and don't let that stump you. Okay? If you have any questions, send me a remind or we'll talk about it in our next class. All right, so here we go again. Hopefully you have written this so many times that you remember the rules for multiplication and division only. We will not use this for addition and subtraction. When we are multiplying or dividing, we'll be dividing in this video. Positive and negative numbers, here go our rules. If both of the numbers being divided are positive, my answer will also be positive. Both of the numbers in this video being divided are negative, your answer will also be positive. However, if one of the numbers is negative, the other one is positive, it doesn't matter the order. I could have the first one positive, this one negative. Either way, it's going to be a negative answer. So my students should know this by heart at this point. We've done it so many times. Another thing I want you to remember is how do we set up a division when we're going to be doing some long division here with our decimals. Remember, the numerator is the number going on the inside and the denominator will be on the outside. All right, so let's take a look. Let's jump right in. We've got some decimals. These are the rational numbers we're working with right now, decimals, integers, and fractions. So let's focus on dividing decimals. So in this situation, I've got a negative 323 and 75 hundredths being divided by 5. So just like we did with our multiplication, I think it's a great idea to first determine if your answer is going to be positive or negative, and then you don't have to think about that anymore. So if I look at this situation, I've got a negative divided by a positive. I know my answer is going to be negative. Oops. It's going to be negative. And now I can just focus on when you're setting up your long division, please make sure you leave enough space so that you can line up your decimals and your work properly. Oftentimes, what I see many students struggle with is oftentimes just the organization. In math, you really want to be organized. You want to try to write neatly and orderly so that you can make sure your problems are lined up properly. That is often a big problem with students that I see. Okay, so I've got my numerator set up with the decimal. What you want to do is once you have your decimal in the right place, which we do here, bring it up to the top. And now you can just focus on the long division the same way you would if a decimal was not involved. So 5, I cannot take out of a 3, but I can take 5 out of 32, and that's going to come out 6 times. I want you to note that I'm putting the 6 over the 2. I'm lining it up over the 2 because I need to show that this 5 is coming out of 32 6 times. Okay, that would be 30. 6 times 5 is 30. We subtract. You get 2 and bring down your 3. Now, how many times can I take 5 out of 23? That's going to be 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. And subtract, we get a difference of 3. Bring down your 7. 5 out of 37 can come out 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract with a difference of 2. Bring down the last number. We have a 5 here. And 5 out of 25 comes out 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25, and I get a 0. And you want to make sure that you remember what we learned in dividing rational numbers and converting fractions to decimals when we started working with rational numbers. Remember, you have 2 types of decimals, terminating and repeating decimals. And so when your division gets down to 0, this is a terminating decimal. Okay? So my answer here is going to be a negative 64 and 75 hundredths. Okay. All right, so here we are with number 2. What I would like for you to do is pause the video, you try this problem on your own, and then come check back and see if you've got it right or if you have any questions. All right, so the first thing you want to determine is your answer positive or negative. So I have a negative divided by a negative. My answer is going to be positive. Now, you don't have to write a plus for a positive answer, but I forget sometimes. So it might be nice to put a little marker there and just remind yourself that your answer is going to be positive. Now, to set up the division. So I've got my division set up here. But what I want you to remember is that when you are dividing decimals, the number here on the outside, you want it to be a whole number. So you're going to have to move your decimal point until you have a whole number. So instead of 2 3/10, I want a 23 out here. In order to do that, I would have to move my decimal over by one number. If I move the decimal over by one digit, on the inside, I also will move by one digit, and that's where my decimal point is going to go. Okay? So I'm looking at a 23 on the outside instead of a 2.3. And now just focus on the division the way we've always done it. So how many times can 23 come out of 103? Well, I can estimate. I can say, well, 20 comes out of 100 5 times. So why don't I try 23 times 4? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try 23 times 4, and I'll do that multiplication, and I'm going to get 92. So that is the closest you're going to get without going over. So 23 comes out of 103 4 times. And notice that I write it over the 3. I'm taking 23 out of 103. So the 4 should represent that. The answer should represent that it's coming out of 103. If you write the 4 over the 1, then you're saying that you took 23 out of 1 4 times, and that wouldn't be correct. If you write it over the 0, you say you're taking 23 out of 10 4 times, and that's not possible. So you want to make sure you're demonstrating that you're taking that 23 out of 103, the first 3 digits, and it comes out 4 times. 4 times 23 will give me a 92. Do your subtraction, and that's going to be a difference of 11, and bring down the 5. Now, how many times can 23 come out of 115? So if you take a look at your math the math we did here on the side. 23 times 4 gave me 92. Well, I think I can only go one more. So if I were to add another 23 to this 92, it'd be the same like multiplying 23 times 5. And that's going to give me exactly 115. So 23 times 5 equals 115. And subtract, and you get 0. And your answer is going to be a positive 4 and 5/10 is your answer for number 2. Okay, as usual, I have a couple of problems that I'd like for you to do, and I'll go over in class. I'll be checking your notebook, specifically looking for these two and the next two that I leave you to complete on your own. So number 3 and number 4, I'll be looking for all of your work. Remember to show your work, the process, that's how you got the answer, and the answers in class. Let me know if you have any questions. Now we're going to move on to fractions. So far we've gone over decimals. Let's take a look at fractions. All right. So we're going to be dividing fractions. The same rules apply for a positive and negative number, so we'll make that decision first and then focus on the calculation for the fractions. The good thing about dividing fractions is that you're actually going to end up multiplying just like we did in the previous lesson where we were multiplying rational numbers. We just have to make some changes to the fractions in order to do that. So let's get started. So for number 5, I have 7/10 divided by a negative 1/5. So first I'm going to determine, is my answer going to be positive or negative? Well, a positive fraction being multiplied or divided by a negative is going to equal negative. So my answer will be negative. And now I'm going to focus on the calculation for the fraction. So when we are dividing fractions, we're actually going to change the fractions so that we end up multiplying by the reciprocal. If you remember, reciprocal is just simply where we flip the positions of the fraction. So the numerator becomes the denominator becomes the numerator. We do not change the sign of the fraction. We're not changing it to the opposite number. We're simply changing and flipping the position of the numbers. So what I want you, something you can remember, a mnemonic that'll help you remember, is that we keep the first fraction the same, we change the division to multiplication, and we use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Okay? So let's try that and see what that looks like. So if I keep the first fraction the same, I'm going to have 7/10. I'm now going to change from division to multiplication, and I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. So it's still going to be a negative number, except now instead of 1/5, I'm going to have 5/1. So now we're going back to what we've already practiced in class, which is multiplying fractions, and you guys know how to do that. So in order to multiply these fractions, I'm going to simplify first because I see my 10 in the denominator and this 5 in this numerator. I can simplify them. They can both be divided by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. And now I can just multiply across. 7 times 1 is going to give me a 7 in the numerator, and 2 times 1 will give me a 2 in the denominator. Remember, this is going to be a negative answer, as we determined before. And we're going to simplify this into a mixed number. So 2 can come, I can get how many groups of 2 out of 7? Well, I can do that 3 times. And that would be 6, right? 2 times 3 is 6. What's left over from 6 to 7? Well, that's 1. It's always your numerator. And your denominator stays the same. So my answer is going to be a negative 3 1/2. Okay. Okay, so let's see if you can apply that same process to number 6. I'd like for you to pause it and try it on your own. Okay, so now that you've paused it, hopefully this is what you did. First things first, we're going to take a look at our negative and positive numbers and determine the answer, if it's going to be positive or negative. I have a negative number being divided by another negative. My answer is going to be positive, so I'll just write that so I don't forget. And remember, I'm going to keep the first fraction the same. I'm going to change from division to multiplication, and I'm going to make this the reciprocal. So that writing those letters always helps me to keep my problems organized. Now I can make my changes. So I'm going to keep 5/8, and I'm just going to ignore the negatives because I've already determined my answer is going to be positive. So 5/8, oops, 5/8. And I'm going to change from division to multiplication. And the reciprocal here, if I write the reciprocal instead of 6/7, I'm going to have 7/6. Look at your numerators and denominators to see if there's anything that you can simplify. And really, I don't see any numerators and denominators that I can simplify together. Everything is fully simplified. So just multiply across. 5 times 7 is going to give you 35. And 8 times 6 will be 48. There's nothing to simplify in that answer, so your answer is simply a positive 35/48. All right, guys, well, it's your turn now to try these two problems that I will be looking for in class. Remember that dividing fractions, once you make those changes, you keep the first number the same, you change the division so that you're multiplying by the reciprocal, then you're simply doing what we've been doing in previous lessons. You're just multiplying those fractions. Just make sure you remember to make the changes of multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'd like for you guys to do number 7 and number 8. Make sure you work it out and show your work in your notebook. I'll be looking for your work and your answers when I do your notebook check. I'll see you next class.